Hi, welcome to Ask the Manager. We have one of my favorite shows today, and it's because we have high school students on. And I always enjoy that, and I hope you enjoy it too. We have 4 students from Shrewsbury High School. We have Aleesha, Awan, and here I go. And we have Matt Scearbo.
Yep.
And we have Jacob Tran and Matt Rossi. And so I'd like to start by just asking each of you, and we'll start with Aleesha, to tell us a little bit about what you do in high school as a student. Do you have extracurricular activities? Are you involved in sports?
Yeah, I'm involved in a couple of clubs like Model UN. I do sports like cross country. I do debate, stuff like that. So
Great.
yeah.
I do cross country as well and track. I'm in table tennis club, ultimate frisbee. I'm a Boy Scout.
Cool.
I'm in Modern United Nation, Asian Culture Club, History Club, Junior State of America, and that's about it.
That's a lot.
And I play golf in the fall, and then I hope to make the varsity baseball team this spring. I've played on JV for the past 3 years.
Great. What position do you play?
Shortstop.
Cool.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, good luck.
Thank you.
So we'll start with, I'll let you ask the first few questions, and hopefully I'll give you an opportunity to ask most of your questions. So why don't we start with Aleesha?
So my question is, since we now have a 5th elementary school, what is the process to redistrict the schools, and where do we stand with that process?
So we are just at the beginning of the redistricting process. The redistricting will be conducted through the school committee with the leadership of the superintendent and Assistant Superintendent Collins. And there'll be public input process that occurs, and it will go into effect once the new Beale Elementary School does open up, which will be in the fall of 2021. So not the beginning of next school year, but the school year after. And so that'll be a very forward-looking process from my understanding of it, where we'll not only look at, kind of where overcrowding is among some of the other elementary schools, but we'll also be moving to a full day K model, which means that, even if, we'll be looking to shift students, across all elementary schools. So it'll be more of a neighborhood-based school model. So it's going to be a pretty big process. Besides what's in place right now or where folks live right now, we'll look at the future growth opportunities within the community and make sure that we have put ourselves in a good position to be able to handle any new growth. Like we know the Edgemere Drive-In project is going to be redeveloped but may not be open by the time the school's open. But we'll anticipate the number of students that may be coming from that area and make sure we don't overburden the school right off the bat. So it's going to be a process, and I'm glad I can say that it's going through the superintendent and the school committee and not through the town managers, because there's going to be a lot of passion involved. But knowing those folks, there'll be a lot of good public input, and we would encourage people to participate in that. So,
How about Matt?
On a similar note, what's going to happen with the old Beale property?
It's to be determined, really. We're moving through a multi-phase process with that property right now. So first and foremost, we have a little bit of time. We have one full school year left after this one, so about school year and a half left. And there's a lot of interest in redeveloping and rezoning and providing more vibrancy in the town center for the community. And that's going to be a key parcel involved in that. So we did a town center visioning study and spent a lot of time looking at various development opportunities, just block models, like what could fit on the site and what are the needs within the town center. So we've produced that document, has a few different options where buildings could be located. Could we just renovate that particular building and use it for something else? But ultimately, we're looking for the private sector to respond. So a Beale reuse committee was established with a number of town residents on it, and they're really charged with putting that property in the best light to get kind of the best and highest use out of it, whether the existing building stays or is torn down or whatever the private sector developer may want to do with it. At the Board of Selectmen's meeting, actually Tuesday night of this week, they signed a document with with Mass Development, which is the economic development financing arm of the state, to conduct a RFP process. It'll cost about $25,000, where a document will be put out expressing the town's interest in what we'd like to see happen on that site, and then have private developers respond to that. And it would really be the developer that meets the most number of needs that the town identifies through that RFP process. So it's really to be determined. Hopefully it's something that brings a lot of traffic, not in a bad way, vibrancy and people into the town center, and hopefully can be a catalyst for the redevelopment and the reinvigoration of that part of town.
I think of things like Quincy Market, and then I think it can't be a storage shed.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some of the things that you think of that could be on that property?
I would like to see mixed-use development go on there, so both residential component and a business component to it. I think mixed use is, that's what you see in historic quintessential New England town center buildings. You see that at the corner of Main Street and Boylston Street, Route 140, where there's businesses on the first floor, whether it's restaurants or other service environments, and then residents on the top. I think that does a couple things for the town. Would provide relatively affordable housing options, would likely be a rental market, which is something that's needed within the community to meet affordability standards and provide whatever group, the seniors that are looking for a downsize, the millennials that are looking to be close and in walking distance, young families, however you want to characterize or group people. I think it provide a lot of opportunity to build in that vibrancy in the downtown, have people there, 24/7, won't look like a ghost town at the end of the day when the restaurants or shops would close up. That's my, kind of vision, or the best and
That's
highest
the top
use
floor.
for it.
What about the bottom floor?
Well, a number of things. I would like to see
Restaurants?
restaurants, I think, bring great vibrancy. Small breweries, brew pubs are very common and are growing across the state. So I definitely see opportunities for things like that. Some place for people to congregate, coalesce, be with each other.
Okay, how about the other map?
Right. So kind of on that topic, but given Shrewsbury's rapid growth, are there steps being taken to prevent overdevelopment? So like too many people moving in and living here, or something like that?
Yeah, it's something that we do really think about as we approach each one of these projects, like the Edgemere Drive-In redevelopment and the Lakeway Commons redevelopment project, because there's only so much infrastructure that we have to service folks. And we do have to be careful, at the state level, or if it comes to drinking water or sanitary wastewater or wastewater removal, we're only allowed to draw so much water out of the ground on a daily, weekly, annual basis, and we can only process so much sewerage at the treatment plants that we send it through. So there's clearly a cap that exists within the community. And we have some buffer right now. We're not at the within the 90th percentile of either of those, but it's something that we really focus on. Things like efficiencies in those systems, and tightening up the sewer systems to make sure that stormwater is not getting into it, and sending clean stormwater in with our sanitary sewer to keep those counts down. Higher efficiency appliances in the water end really helps those things as well. I always like to answer questions similar to this, that while unending growth and growth that provides extreme congestion and really lowers the quality of life is not a position that we want to be in, continual growth and vibrancy is important to a community. I've worked in communities where there is little or no growth, building 1 or 2 homes a year, really large lot sizes, and it has a different feel. It brings with it a little less desirability and a little less interest in the community. So I think you just have to be careful. So while I understand that, you don't want to choke the town and make it unbearable to live here and lower the quality of life, I think that desire and interest in constant investment keeps it vibrant, keeps it attractive, keeps property values favorable to the property owners. So there's a balance there.
When you mention the water usage, is it 65 gallons per person per day in a household?
That's the target we like to get to.
Do we have any idea where we stand as a household, or the average amount of water used per household?
It's below that right now.
Good.
Yeah, so
So we have a lot of dirty people?
we have a lot of less people watering their lawns.
That's what it
It's a
is.
huge driver. You can look at some residential water bills if you want to study boring data and see wow, you can really tell whenever a household's watering their lawn. You'll see their summer quarterly bills, quadruple what they are. The average quarterly bill in town for all of our customers is about 17 to 19,000 gallons a quarter. But you'll see in the summertime, that same property be at 60 or 80,000. So, their lawn's nice and green and all that stuff, and they're paying for the water, but it really draws down on the capability of the community to service everyone.
And households are notified when they go over a certain amount of water usage?
No.
Should they be?
They notice that their bills go up,
Yeah.
for sure.
But should they be notified?
I think inherently they are through the bills outside of the process. There is always an outside watering ban in the summers. We haven't been very strict in enforcing it, but it is another step that we could take if we had to, in order to try to ensure a lack of overusage or keep it from being overly used.
But people can water their gardens.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, you can ask.
Yeah, so
Jason.
given the overcrowding at Shrewsbury High School, are there any plans to address this issue?
Yep, a couple, hopefully. I'm currently working on the fiscal year 2021 plan, which will start next July. Capital plan, which will start next July. And one of the projects that's getting thoroughly vetted out is the renovation of some space that's currently used by, I believe it's the Assabet within the lower wing of the high school. So that would actually provide some more classroom space after we renovate it. So that would alleviate a little bit. And then as part of the Beal project, funds were earmarked to conduct a district-wide capital building study to identify those pinch points. We certainly know that we're beyond capacity at the high school, but really put a solid 20-year plan in place on how we're going to address those. That's what I think brought the town a lot of great success in our building projects that we've gone through starting with Floral. There was a study that preceded the construction of Floral and then led us to redevelopment or augmentation at Patton, and then replacement at Sherwood, and now Beal. So that process was really put in place in, I believe, 1998, 1999. So we're nearing the end of that plan and looking to the future to see what occurs within the next round. And of course, the high school in and of itself was in that project as well. So it's on the table. It's going to be costly and something that we have to manage. And we'll look at enrollments, and if we need to make a change, it's something that we're going to have to go to the community and ask them to invest in.
You could have all the seniors go back to Oak Middle School and
Yeah.
have their high school be on Oak Street again. I mean, no. See
What
how rumors start? How do you find the school crowded? How do you experience it?
It's annoying. It is. It's really annoying.
In the hallways, do you mean, or in class, or?
In the hallways, as I'm trying to get out, people are blocking the exit, and I really can't move. And it takes a while for me to get to my class, and sometimes I'm late or the bell rings and I'm not there, and
Traffic jams?
traffic jams.
Just like Route 9.
How about it in the cafeteria and things like that? Do you see it there?
Yeah.
It's
So-
pretty packed.
Yeah.
Hard to get a seat.
Yeah, I mean, some people have to rush down from their class just to get a seat if they want one with their friends.
Really?
Yeah.
That's definitely
I
true.
mean, there's a lot of people down there.
The cafeteria being packed was a lot more of an issue last year, I feel like. I'm pretty sure recently they added a couple more tables in there, so that was nice. But the cafeteria and the hallways when the bell rings are the main areas where you see it. Classrooms, in my opinion, are all right. I don't know about them.
Now, you realize the cafeteria is named after my brother,
Is
I
it?
did
just
not
in
know.
case you want to know. It is. They did dedicate it to him. I just thought there's a little plaque and it says Ken Largis. You can see that he was involved with building the school when he was working at the high school. So just a piece of useless information for you.
I'll look out for it.
Okay. Okay, Aleesha.
Anyway, so at SHS, families are required to pay fees, whether it be athletic, bus, clubs. So do other school districts charge as many fees? Why or why not?
That's a good question. We were just talking about fees, right?
I hate fees.
So fees, although not loved by many, are really essential to how we conduct business. So from a very high level, in the late 1970s and enacted in 1980 was Proposition 2.5. And Proposition 2.5 in the state said you can only raise your tax levy by 2.5% greater than in any prior year. So I made the comment the other day that really, there would be no private entity that remained in business if it was only allowed to grow its revenue by 2.5% in any year. But that's the reality that we're faced with year in and year out whenever we look at revenues and have to allocate them to priorities. So I'm not saying it's crazy innovative or really far out there on the thought process of using fees to augment our tax base, but it really has become a necessity. So whenever there's any opportunity that we find ourselves in a position where we don't have enough tax revenue and we can really differentiate different service levels among residents. Some of those services could be optional, and I'll go away from schools, but like recreation programs. Like in theory, you could cover all costs of a recreation program through the tax rate. You can clearly identify when one resident's using a recreation program and when they're not. So, kind of from a general government financial standpoint, anytime you can quantify or show that there's a disproportionate usage by one group of residents or one resident over another, it's okay to charge a fee. So we've really had to embrace that model and say, well, these are the core services, education and otherwise, that we provide through the tax rate. And if residents are interested in additional services or expanded services to some extent, there's these fees that are put into place for those more discretionary items. So I know on the education side, some of those things may be a little less discretionary for some than others, and they may cause burdens, but that's really the theory behind it. I'm not really able to say, how much more in fees we charge than other districts. I know that Shrewsbury has done a lot and relied upon fees very heavily. A lot of that goes to our desires and the priorities that we use the tax rate for, because service level expectations are very high, especially on the education side. And it's really just a way to augment that, not arbitrary, but that cap that we're put on at the state level. So it's good from a fiscal policy standpoint if you look across the state and try to manage real estate tax increases, but it severely limits our abilities year in and year out on what opportunities that we can provide to residents. So
It's one time that Shrewsbury, we're always excited when they're front runners in something. And this is one time where it wasn't necessarily the best thing that they were the front runners. But more districts are charging fees across the state and in other states. You're starting to hear it because people in other towns are complaining about it too. So unfortunately, we were leaders in that, but it's definitely something that's disappointing as far as I'm concerned. not necessarily that other people aren't disappointed too, but it seemed like at the time, especially around 2008, it became a necessary evil when the economy fell. And we wanted to maintain those activities. And sometimes that's how things get put into place, and then we get used to it. So I'll get off my soapbox for a while on that. So, yeah.
Okay. So what do you think the biggest challenge facing the town of Shrewsbury is?
Fees, no, what?
I mean, I think as a single item, it's water quality right now. We're really focused and we're making a lot of improvements in that area, but it's something that we talk about day in and day out because we want to make it better. You know, we invested in the new drinking water treatment plant, $13 million, and you know that's constructed and online, and we solved the first part of a two-step or two phases of a single problem, which is brown water that's created from manganese. So manganese is a natural occurring mineral that gets pumped out of the ground in our from our aquifers, and now we are trapping all that manganese in using bacteria that eat up the manganese and get stuck in our filters. So that means that clean water flows past them and goes out into the system. So we're no longer introducing that into the drinking water system, but after decades of having it in the system, and it's accumulated within the mains, and now we're in the process of cleaning those mains. So it's really frustrating to me and to our DPW team when residents call or send us a picture of their pristine bathtub and with brown water in it. We never want that to happen. So we've really been focused on improving water quality. And we put about $865,000 in place to address this main cleaning through a unidirectional flushing program, which actually started in earnest the beginning of this week. We did 2 days of flushing. But two other aspects, which is really, I think, a long-term concern and something that we'll be focused on throughout the next few decades, is other contaminants within the drinking water system. So we have hexavalent chromium, which is from heavy industry and metal plating businesses it's somehow made it into our drinking water system. So we're piloting a technology to be able to remove that, and that's going to start this spring. We recently identified PFAS substances, which are man-made chemicals that were used in waterproofing of clothing, non-stick surfaces on pans, firefighting foam, that are bioaccumulative. So that means the more you drink it, the more it stays in your body and is potential carcinogen. So
Cleaning products.
Cleaning
Some
products.
Some cleaning
Yep.
products have it.
So, but those two things fall into what's called unregulated contaminants. And as science gets better and better, and we can detect smaller and smaller quantities of things within our water, we're going to find more and more things. And as an example on PFAS, we have we actually have about 13 parts per trillion. And 1 part per trillion is literally a grain of sand in an Olympic swimming pool. But we are able to identify that we have 13 parts per trillion, of PFAS within our drinking water supply. So, but 2 years ago, whenever scientific labs were only able to test down to 20 parts per trillion, we had non-detect. We didn't think we had it. So science has improved over the last 2 years. Now all of a sudden we have it, and we're going to have to react. So my concern is that as science gets better, and we're asked to, rightfully so, we're asked to look for more and more chemicals within the drinking water system to ensure public health, we're going to find more things. And it's concerning to me that finding more things will mean that expenses would outpace our ability to actually remove them from the system. So when we put solutions in place, we need to be as broad as possible with our filtration technologies to make sure we're capturing as much as we can, even if we're addressing a specific problem.
You know how there are things we can do, because it's not just in our drinking water, it's how we consume various products. We can change the cleaning products we use in our home if we educate ourselves on what's safe and what isn't. So when you see people cleaning with vinegar or baking soda as opposed to things out of a bottle that you spray or whatever. Oftentimes, those are things that help our environment, but it helps us. I just, this past month, got rid of all my wonderful pans that I loved that were non-stick, and I went back to cast iron pans like my mother used. And so there are things we can do because we're consuming food in our own home. It's not just in our water. So there are things we can do to contribute to getting PFAS out of our environment. And so you just don't use things that you know that it's in. I assume that if something says flame retardant on it, and it does tell you on the tag to wash your clothes before wearing, if you wash the clothes, you're getting rid of a lot of those contaminants that were subtly, you know, we think they're wonderful improvements, and now we're finding out that it's showing up in our drinking water. So there are many things that we can do.
Yeah.
And so as we get rid of plastic bags or whatever else comes along, we need to think about what's in our own homes and how we can improve upon those.
And one of those things are in a lot of homes is pharmaceuticals, right? So we've been very diligent in asking residents to not flush their pharmaceuticals down the drain, or down the toilet, right? Because they may go out of sight, but they are collected through our sewer mains and ultimately make it into our sewer treatment plants, which are not designed to remove pharmaceutical products from it. And ultimately, those pharmaceuticals pass through our wastewater treatment plants and back out into our water systems, into the rivers or wherever they discharge. So we're focused on, you know, kind of the historic models in drinking water treatment and, you know, wastewater treatment, and it's not collecting all these wonderful man-made substances and chemicals, which have, you know, some have great value to society, but we just have to be conscious of every action that we take to make sure it doesn't have unintended consequences.
And the town's been proactive by having collection days, and they're pretty convenient. So we may end up having to think about having more than twice a year, but that's progress, you know, because they didn't collect them ever. You think, what do you do with this stuff? So I tend to have bagfuls each time we go, and you think, how does this happen? But we do. So you just have to think about it. We used to flush those. Yeah. So where were we? Oh, before we go any further, I just want to be sure everyone at home knows, this is the American government class at the high school. So if you're wondering why these students seem so informed, it's because they're from the American government class. And who wants to tell us about the class? I guess it's Matt.
Sure.
He's smiling, so he gets it.
Yeah, so our teacher is Mr. Aloisi, great teacher, good football coach as well. I'm
Yeah,
sure
he's standing
There
right
he
over
goes.
there.
I
We
can't
know.
see him right now,
He
but
loves
I'm sure
it.
he's fist pumping.
He's loving it.
So we learn about local government, federal government, state government. We go through everything such as the Constitution to where right now we're doing a project on the Edgemere project. So we're doing a project on a project, if you can get that. But so Mr. Mizikar actually came into our classroom and gave us a little information about the Edgemere project. We're reaching out to members that work in the town hall doing the project, and we're all specialized in a different thing. So like my group is doing traffic and transportation. So I think we're getting a pretty good amount of knowledge, and what I took out of that too is Mr. Aloisi always said people forget how important local government is, because that's what really affects you the most. Because I mean, yeah, sure, you live in the United States, but the president's not going to deal with your local drinking water or your local fees or anything like that. So
Anyone want to add anything? Did he leave anything out? Now, you mentioned you've covered the Constitution?
yeah, we go through pretty much everything. I mean, the Articles of Confederation when they failed, and then the Constitution went in. I mean, we go through a lot. State Constitution too. We look at the Massachusetts State Constitution occasionally, depending on what we're doing in class.
That's great. Timely to look at the Constitution. In fact, I just, believe it or not, just bought a little book about the Constitution because I want to be sure I have all my T's crossed and my I's dots when I get into debates with people about the issues with the Constitution these days.
Yeah.
So let's go back to Matt with your next question.
Okay. So it's about the, most people know we recently completed the turf field at Shrewsbury High School, which is a pretty big accomplishment. So I'm not exactly sure, but was the field funded entirely by private donations such as Central One, or was it funded by the town, like citizens itself? And
Mhm.
if it was privately funded only, why do you think that most people maybe don't want to raise the taxes to pay for that, or don't want to chip in for that?
It's a good question.
Yeah, very good question. So it was privately fundraised, 100%. There was a debate within the community in the years past about having the town fund it, and Donna has probably a little more information on it than I do. But you know, there was a kind of an environmental discussion that was going on in the background, from my knowledge, about fields like this being synthetic, what the infill materials are they safe to play on, what happens when it gets really hot, all those things. And there was just not enough public support was ever garnered to fund it through public means. You know, and I guess that's the beauty of many facets of funding, you know. So there's a good public discourse. The public in general chose not to fund a particular project, which is great that they had a voice, and government couldn't just, you know, ram it through and say, no, we're going to do that anyway. But then it also showed other interest in the community to raise those funds, and I think was very careful and well thought out on the use of materials and the type of materials that were selected for the field. And you know, it's in place. It does provide, you know, significant benefit, wear and tear, and opportunity for longer athletic seasons and things like that. So there's a clear operational advantage to having it. I don't know if you have
No,
any other.
I'll bet you're asking that question because you're a baseball player and you're looking forward to the baseball field being considered for turf also. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I had interest in that. I'm sure in the future something will happen way after we are gone. I mean, we're seniors, so there's nothing much we can do by spring, obviously. I also play golf, but I know the two sports I play, unfortunately, I'm not lucky enough to get to play on the field. But I do think other fields in the future should be looked at. I mean, I know the high school baseball field is really in rough condition right now. I mean, the whole outfield, it's soccer JV practices on it. They rip it up, and then on top of that, if you literally look at from home base to the fence, the entire field just goes up and down like a little hill, which to me, I don't find that safe, just because if someone's running back and then go down, their momentum's taken
So when
down.
you run from shortstop to the outfield to get a ball, you don't want to fall in the hole.
Yeah, essentially.
But you won't benefit by it this year.
No, but I also
do you
don't-
have an opinion as far as how it should be funded? Should it be funded through taxes, or should it be funded through donations?
So I don't pay taxes in this town. So I mean, that's a great question. If I was older, maybe I'd have a different say. But I don't know.
Are you saying just do it?
Well, so I think it was great that Central One took initiative and they donated as much as they did to get the field. I think definitely in a town meeting, maybe a proposal to see if the town wants to pay for it. I think that would be a great idea to see, just because I know a lot of kids will benefit from it. Sure, not everyone plays baseball, but I mean, all the other sports are on the turf now, and they're not so lucky. We're not so lucky. So I think it should definitely be a topic at town meeting.
So that, you know, the process is you need to talk to the selectmen, right? To get that on the warrant for town meeting.
Yeah.
So maybe your American government class, along with your baseball team, should be talking to the selectmen. What do you think?
I think we could probably do that, yeah.
Okay, sounds good. Okay,
You want that?
Jacob, your turn.
So on the topic of Shrewsbury, I recently learned that Shrewsbury has a pretty low property tax rate. Can you explain why our tax rate is lower compared to our neighboring towns?
Sure. So there's a couple of factors that's involved in that. So I'll go back to that 1980 Proposition 2.5 number. So when there's so property taxes work that, you know, all property taxes are assessed at their value and then applied the same tax rate, and it raises a specific amount of money. So when Proposition 2.5 came in 1980, it locked in that amount of money that we were able to raise. So let's just say is $1 million. So from that point forward, in some ways, your the other part of the equation, which is the tax rate, has, was locked in as well. So because this number can only go up by so much, this number is only going to go up by so much. So in some ways, it really put a lot of towns in a different box. And towns were all over the place in the 1980s. And some towns were increasing their tax rates by 10 and 12%. And some towns were increasing their tax rate by 1 or 2%, knowing that Mr. Dick Carney was in Shrewsbury at that time. It was probably on the lower end.
It was.
So that means that kind of, when those two numbers were frozen or confounded in the future, we started off at a lower place, so we're going to kind of remain behind folks. The other factor in that is the third number that's in that equation is the property value. So because Shrewsbury's been so popular and been so vibrant and real estate values have increased so much over the past 3 consecutive years, as much as I'd like to give myself credit in my tenure, the math equation in and of itself meant that the tax rate has been declining because the property values are going up so much. So the factor that we multiply them by has actually gone down because we can, again, only raise 2.5% more than we did in the prior year. So one way to change that or to get the tax rate to go higher would be if property values were to decline, but we're still, we can it doesn't matter how good the economy is or how bad the economy is, we can always increase the amount of money that we raise by 2.5%. So if the values decline, that tax rate will automatically go up. Or if there's any type of exclusion or override to the provisions of Proposition 2.5. So towns are allowed to exclude 2.5 if they take on debt and ask town meeting and the voters at the ballot box to approve that. So for the Beale School, whenever you hear someone say, there's going to be a ballot question to allow for this borrowing or a debt exclusion question that's asked at town meeting, that means those folks at town meeting and at the ballot box are actually saying we are going to allow the town to raise more than 2.5%, in this coming year and in future years in order to satisfy the debt that occurs. So we can raise our 2.5% and then we can go above and beyond that to also pay any outstanding debt obligations that we have that we're allowed to exceed it. And then there's an operating override, so you can override the provisions of Proposition 2.5 for general operating purposes that happened in 2014, 2015, that would increase that tax rate and allow us to raise more than 2.5% by specific dollar values. So it's really a function of where we were locked in the 1980s, early 1980s, and really the rapid increase in property values within the community, which is driven by not having very strict planning restrictions or restrictions from a planning standpoint on how many homes are allowed to be developed, but then also just being developed or very desirable from the level of services, whether that be education or otherwise, that makes people want to move here. So
The other part
really
to
the
that
result.
is you want to create revenue other than from the tax base. So you want to bring businesses to town. So that's why Lakeway was so important to us, because we wanted those businesses here paying us taxes so that it wasn't just on the residential taxpayer, but that we got more money from business. Along with that, Edgemere will do the same thing. We'll benefit by those businesses going in place. But if you were to watch this show, you would see that a lot of times you'll hear me say things like, we need more restaurants. It's because there's a restaurant tax, there's a food tax, and that tax goes towards our revenue. And so you want to find anything that's a creative way to create revenue in the town. We have revenue through Wheelabrator because they burn their ash and then they dispose of it in our town in a sophisticated system where it doesn't contaminate our property, but we get money for that. So we want that revenue because that helps to keep our tax rate down. So people have been very conscious of trying to use fiscal responsibility and be creative and be responsible to be considerate of the taxpayers so that it doesn't go higher than it needs to. So that's another part of it. But there's always the twisting and tugging on, if we raise the tax rate, we can do these things. If we don't raise the tax rate, you know, people are obviously better off because the money is in their pocket instead of just, you know, being paid in taxes. So that's another part of it.
Absolutely.
But the value of the homes has been substantial. Does that help?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay. So now we're getting back down to Aleesha.
So, as we had talked about previously, in recent years, Shrewsbury has grown considerably. So how does the town project or monitor future growth in a town?
So we look at a couple things really specifically, and one of the most important, I think, has one of the greatest impact on services is number of school-age children. So actually on an annual basis, Kristen Last in my office, assistant town manager, does an actual study of number of school-age children within the community, and we do that by looking at the town census and seeing where children are coming from in what neighborhoods. Like, we know that there's 16 school-age children that live in the Lakeway Commons development because we can look at the census. So what that allows us to do is say, okay, so Lakeway Commons has 250 apartment units, and they range from 1 to 3 bedrooms. So now we can apply that standard to the Market Basket development and anticipate the number of children that are going to come. And since the early 1990s, the town has been modeling that on every subdivision and residential development that has come into the community. And that really gives us a great advantage to really understand and assess the impact that any future development would have, especially, you know, on the schools, but just from a general population standpoint in general. The only other real limitation, as I alluded to before, is kind of lot size. You know, if a community was interested in reducing the amount of future development and construction, it could say, in order to build a single-family home or any residential unit, you must have at least 1 acre of land. Now,
Which we've tried
Yep.
twice, and it got shot down at town meeting, and it was because they called that snob zoning. So in other words, as you're trying to have houses that are affordable for people starting out with their starter homes or of a certain income, you don't want to have large lot size because then they can never buy a home in Shrewsbury. So, but that's been shot down twice so far.
Right. Yeah, so I mean, you know, the larger the piece of land that you have to construct, or that you need to construct a single-family home on, then obviously the less homes you could line up in any particular street or roadway, and it really limits growth. But we probably have, I would argue, one of the most sophisticated data sets of school-age children, you know, in the state, if not the region or the country, and that really enables and informs our planning process. So if someone were to come in and say, I'm going to put in an 8-lot subdivision off of Walnut Street, we would really be able to say, that's going to yield 3/4 of a school-age child on average.
So, and then the other part, when they, for example, when Lakeway was being designed, there was a limitation to the number of 3-bedroom apartments and 2 bedrooms, correct? And they did that purposely so you didn't get large families, which meant more school-age children. Not that there's anything wrong with school-age children, it's just how it was going to impact our schools.
So, yeah, it's a balance of the resources that we have and expectations of the services that we provide with those resources.
So Matt?
You kind of stole it earlier.
Okay.
It was what steps have been taken to address the water quality issues in the town? If there's anything else you want to add to it.
Yeah,
go for it,
I mean, like I said, my biggest concern will remain within water is just what they call unregulated contaminants. And, you know, I mentioned pharmaceuticals, but the real question is, you know, what don't we know that, you know, that has made it into our drinking water systems? And I know residents get really frustrated whenever I have to do, or someone has to do the undesirable thing to say, hey, we found this in the water. You know, we didn't put it there. We're going to do everything we can to get it out. And it's in a very complex regulatory environment. I wish I could go in and say, the town of Devon's used carbon filtration to remove PFAS, so let's just go install a carbon filter. Well, DEP says, no, 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 no. You're going to pilot that, you're going to test it, you're going to measure what the outcomes are, and then we'll give you the authority to do that. Now, DEP is being very lenient in allowing towns to move forward as fast as possible so they can remove any of these, identified contaminants.
Because it's across the country.
Yeah, it is.
And across the world.
Yep, but they do their job. I mean, that's what they're there for. They don't want towns tinkering with some new filtration system that may have unintended consequences that are much worse than what they're trying to do. So anytime that we're going to consider a new drinking water well or a replacement well or a filtration technology, right off the bat, if we learn something day one, we're not going to have a permanent solution in place for 365 or 450 days. It's going to take a year or a year and a quarter to really get through that regulatory process. And that's not a hit on the regulatory process. That should be there, and it's served this country well, and the state well, through the Clean Water Act. But that's a little frustrating. I know residents are like, oh, it's red tape or it's government bureaucracy. It is all those things, but they do serve a purpose at the same time.
Man,
All right, so I just made this one up on the spot, actually. It's a little different. But,
Good.
I know our understanding is that on the Edgemere project, there are going to be a couple, I call them specialty shops, like smaller shops, not such like a CVS or something like that. Why do you think that in Shrewsbury there's not as many stores as there maybe should be or there are in other towns? Because I know, like you were talking to us in school, that if you really think about it, on Route 9 and Route 120, that's where most of the businesses are. But if you look everywhere else, it's pretty much houses. So do you think the town could benefit from more businesses coming into the town? And if so, do you think the land would we have to put those businesses in?
Right. Yeah. So
we have land.
we do have
The
land.
Adams property.
Yeah. So, I do think that in some ways, so the tax base in Shrewsbury is 83% residential, or I'm sorry, 87% residential, 13% commercial, non-residential. So that's not the worst in the state as far as the split goes, but it's also not the best. You see your Burlingtons and your Westboroughs, and they have greater percentages of that. I think the businesses that are in those corridors are certainly right, but I think if you look at those two corridors distinctly, there's one major difference. So Route 9, more densely populated with businesses, a lot more businesses, a lot more vibrancy, versus Route 20. You'll see a lot of truck storage facilities, asphalt plants, kind of low, spread out. And the main differences between those two corridors is sanitary sewer. As you run sanitary sewer in an area, you can pack things in and have a greater intense use because you don't have septic systems. That's not your waste disposal system. So I think Route 20 has been very limited by the fact that it doesn't have sanitary sewer in it. And we've, 2 town meetings ago, put $6.5 million in place to kickstart that. We do have other land, town-owned land, that we're trying to incentivize businesses to come through, Centec North or Allen Farm property. We are also as far off as 2008 was in your minds. It feels different than Donna and feels different to me. We're still recovering from that economic downturn, and if you look to the east of us, we're just a little too far from 495. It's location, location, location. Too far from 495. Too far from Boston, too far from the Mass Pike. And there's an oversaturation in the commercial real estate market where people can still just move into a place in Marlboro and open their business there. You see Amazon's doing, which I'm really jealous of, my colleague Christy Williams in the town of Westboro. Amazon's moving into where AstraZeneca was to pilot some robotics stuff for their warehouses. That's great jobs. They're moving into a vacant building. So while there's millions and millions of square foot of vacant buildings that still exist in more desirable locations, we're going to continue to struggle to attract those businesses into the community.
But it'll happen.
Yep.
Yeah,
Jacob?
so with the topic of Lakeway Commons, are there any differences with that and the current Edgemere project?
Edgemere, in some ways, from a physical development standpoint, should be a lot easier than Lakeway Commons. There was a lot of two aspects: property assembly for Lakeway Commons, right? That's the single. What you now view as Lakeway Commons was not owned by one owner. Vast majority of it was the former Spags property, but they had to cobble together other pieces to make the project work for them financially and have enough mass. And then the other physical aspect, is the tear down of existing buildings that were on it and a true redevelopment where, while there was an old drive-in, it was single ownership, a lot lower intensity development, just some, paving and, the former screens even down now at this point. So I think in some ways that property is a lot easier to develop, but is only able to be developed. One of the main reasons it's being developed now is because we are improving that sewer infrastructure within that section of the community. So, but all in all, square footage wise, number of residential units, amount of commercial, they're very similar projects, which gives us a lot of comfort that we can manage, that whole process. It's a huge stress that you all probably had started to hear about today from the life safety standpoint, the number of inspectors that we'll have to have on site. We have to look at every electrical system in all 250 units. We can't just assume because one's right that the other one's right, because that's not fair to that future resident that moves into that unit that we didn't inspect. So a lot of similarities, but some ways I don't have to build the project, so I can kind of say what I want to say, but I think it'll be a little bit easier from a physical development standpoint.
Is West Main Street construction done all the way to the Worcester
It
line?
is, yeah.
All the way to the Worcester line?
Wait,
So, like down by the lake,
yep.
that end, is that all complete?
I don't know if that's final paving in it. You mean over to 290 and all that? Yeah.
Right, because I don't know if any of you drive and you
Right.
turn on to Holden Street, have you noticed the road's already falling apart?
Right in front of the high school? Or like the,
As
where
you turn to go to the high school.
Yep.
Yeah, that road right there, right off West Main Street onto Holden is already falling apart, so I didn't know if it was done or if that was temporary.
I'll have to look into that one.
Yeah, you have to get
Sorry.
that state to do their job, right? Don't want
Exactly.
these kids putting their
Hitting the
tires
pothole.
into the potholes.
Yeah.
So, do any of you drive to school?
Yes.
And
I-
how is it parking at the high school?
So that one, we've actually, a lot of students, that's like a well talked about topic at our school. I believe actually we talked about at one of our, what we call our town meeting at the high school, where we asked Mr. Bazidlo and student council a bunch of questions. Can't remember what he said about it. I know they added a lot of new parking spots, which did help. There was 100 plus, I believe,
Added?
90 plus something added, yeah. It's always a lot harder too with the snow,
Yeah.
which, I always wondered if there was any way they could, because the plows they use at the high school aren't like pickup trucks with a plow, they're the big ones that can lift stuff. So I was wondering if they could maybe, lift the snow and throw it over the guardrails or somewhere out of the way instead of blocking 20, 30, 40 parking spots, especially by the gym side. Because then I know it's an inconvenience, a small inconvenience that we have to park up and then walk all the way down. But even in general, I think it would just build up more parking spots.
We were thinking about using the baseball field to store snow.
Well, it'd add water to you'd get more, if your drainage is okay, it'd be all right, for the grass?
I
Yeah.
wouldn't like that.
No. But either snow removal or tell the people plowing to get it off the parking spaces, is what you're saying.
I guess, yeah. We definitely.
You hear them.
Right now, if you look out the window, we definitely have enough parking spots. Even today, I look out the window, there's still empty parking spots up by what we call junior parking, which is way up in the back. So, I think what the town did and the school did was definitely helped making all those. I guess it's not ideal to have to walk that far. We still do it.
And plus, if you're coming, it's not just you, it's visitors, it's
Yeah.
people that are there in the evening.
Exactly, yeah.
Right. So, Aleesha, did you have another question?
No, I'm good.
You
yeah.
good? Does anyone have any other questions? I have a question.
What?
I had a resident ask about the fees for impervious surfaces.
Okay.
That is annual?
There's
No.
So there's stormwater. There's a $90 the fee every year is $90 for property owners that are in tier 1, but there are several tiers, and that's based upon impervious surface. I believe the number up in tier 1 is up to 5,000 square feet of impervious surface. So if someone has a very long driveway or a larger home with, maybe a horseshoe-shaped driveway or something like that, or a lot of development on their property, that could push them from tier 1 into tier 2, which means they would pay more than $90 a year.
And it's quarterly?
It's on your quarterly water and sewer bill.
So if you get a bill for $90, it's $90 quarterly, or, yeah?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you've
So-
been receiving a bill, thus far, that would be 4 times that.
Have you gotten complaints about that?
We've received a few.
Yeah.
Yeah. Trying to explain the process and, the obligations that we have with the federal government and meeting our permit requirements, which is where it all stems from. So it's
So it's not that Shrewsbury created this on their own, it's because they have to meet the standards for
Yeah, we have to-
wastewater treatment.
Yeah, we have to meet the standards and potentially would have to treat our stormwater before we allow it to run off into bodies of water like Lake Quinsigamond if it has too high of contamination of phosphorus or nitrogen or any other particular contaminants that are collected. And that's why we use impervious surface. So the more water flows over impervious surface and can't charge itself or recharge back into the ground, it gets put into our collection systems and then discharged into streams and lakes. And
Is the fall street sweeping done?
we did fall street sweeping to the extent that we could, and then it snowed.
And then it's no, so is it stopped now?
Yeah, it will be done for the year.
Okay, and is Lake Street open yet, or is it
No.
opening soon?
It will be opening within the next few weeks, sooner rather than later. It is pretty much in shape. We did some center line striping to help people orient themselves as they drive through that new section. It will still be an active construction zone for the next 16, 18 months. So those residents that want to give the new road a shot need to just take their time and watch out for construction workers and keep everyone safe.
Did any of you attend the Yuletide Market?
No,
No.
No?
unfortunately.
Did you?
I was not able to make it, no, but I heard it was a great success.
I thought it was very successful, and it's created a lot of excitement. But I have to thank you for being here, and the hour's up, and I want to say thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.